Welcome back to the Perimenopause Hormone Reset. I'm Jennifer Woodward. We are in Module 25, Insulin. Insulin is a hormone produced by our pancreas. It regulates our blood sugar as a key that unlocks the cell so glucose can get into the cell. When we eat or when our blood sugar levels rise, the pancreas releases insulin. This insulin allows that glucose to be used for energy or stored in the skeletal muscle or the liver for later use. We need to access that glucose later on when we haven't eaten and when we need to have our normal metabolic processes happen. So the body really does need that stored glucose for energy. Insulin also helps regulate fat breakdown, and some research does suggest that high insulin levels can actually suppress fat metabolism by up to 22%. So when we are insulin resistant, when there is lots of insulin kind of floating around our bloodstream, this can actually reduce our fat burning capacity by up to 22%. So if you're insulin resistant, you've been on, a metabolic protocol, a diet for a period of time, and you're still not losing weight, it's possible that those high insulin levels are preventing you from losing weight. And so you're going to have to work on insulin resistance first until you can actually lose weight. I will tell you on the reset, you're only eating 3 meals a day. Every time you eat, every time you chew gum, every time you have sweetened coffee, every time you have a sip of an energy drink, anytime you have what's been called a calorie event where you're taking calories into the body, or while you're accessing a sweet taste, so like a Diet Coke that's sweetened with aspartame, those are all calorie events to the body, and every single one of those calorie events is going to cause the pancreas to release insulin. Every time you eat, the pancreas releases insulin. So this is why a meal plan that has you eating 5 or 6 times a day is not going to be optimal if you're already insulin resistant. So being on the reset, eating 3 times a day is going to begin to help you restore insulin sensitivity. Insulin resistance is what we're just talking about, where you're eating so often or your cortisol is so high so often that the body's releasing insulin quite often as well. And when insulin levels are in the bloodstream and they aren't doing anything, or they're not able to get glucose into the cell because glucose is also so high in the bloodstream, this leads to insulin resistance. You have lots of insulin and it's not doing much. This insulin resistance can lead to prediabetes and also type 2 diabetes. Now, your cells might not respond to insulin properly as well when you are insulin resistant. And in this way, glucose can't be removed from the bloodstream. It can't be stored for later use. You're going to be tired and you are going to start storing your glucose as fat into your fat cells. No bueno. This also can lead to high blood sugar levels or hyperglycemia over time. So if you've ever tracked your blood sugar with a glucometer, and you've seen that it's over between 80 and 90 nanograms per deciliter, and that's, fasting, that is after a meal, that is pre-meal. We really want to keep pretty tight blood sugar ranges. If you see that you're consistently in the upper 90s, the 100s, the 110, 120, this definitely means that you're having elevated blood sugar levels and is a sign of hyperglycemia. I'm not a doctor, so I can't diagnose, treat, or prescribe, but that is one way that you yourself can start to ascertain whether or not you're insulin resistant. High levels of glucose all the time can be a sign of insulin resistance. Now, you can also test for insulin levels. You can test insulin with a blood test. We like to see them between 2 and 3, but oftentimes when I test insulin, I have women who are 15, 20, 25 with their insulin levels, and that is just far too high. That means that insulin is too high in the body, and you are essentially insulin resistant, especially if you're dealing with, overweight. Dr. Jack Cruz is a brilliant MD. It's a little bit off-putting sometimes when he's, speaking. He is so smart that it's really hard to follow a lot of the things he says. He's got such esoteric ideas about metabolism and about light and quantum biology and circadian rhythms and circadian biology. But it is a treat to go in and listen to any one of the podcasts he's done. He's written a book called The Leptin Prescription, the Epipaleo RX, Epipaleo Prescription. You can find that on his website, which I think is jackcruz.com. But if you have, a cup of tea and about 4 hours to spend really dialing in your brain cells to following him, some of his published blog articles are really quite provocative. And his whole platform is light affecting our circadian rhythm, which affects our metabolism. So he himself was a physician who at one point clocked in at over 360 pounds. He was giving a lecture one day and he tore his ACL from being overweight. He had to get to the podium with help to give his lecture. And after that, he thought there's something wrong. There's something wrong that I am doing because I'm a physician, I'm a doctor, this is my specialty, and I am fat and I can't lose weight and I don't know what to do. So he dove really deep into circadian biology and light and had an aha moment in Florence one day while he was looking at Michelangelo's statue of the David, and realized what was different between himself and this perfect specimen of a man, the David, was that David lived in alignment with his circadian biology, and Dr. Jack Cruz did not. There was actually, as he tells it, a beam of light coming in from the top of the Sistine Chapel that was emanating onto the David, and it seemed like a very, very much of an aha moment for Dr. Jack Cruz. So at that moment, he decided he would go into, really deep into circadian biology and light. He wrote a book on his way home from Florence and has been blogging about it and teaching about circadian biology and light ever since. Very fascinating gentleman, but like I said, pretty dang hard to follow. I'm going to distill some of his ideas down for you. And really, it's one of the cruxes of what the reset is built on: circadian rhythm, circadian biology. What Dr. Cruz says is that light, it has the most powerful effect on insulin and also melatonin, our sleepy hormone. So we were just talking about insulin. We know what insulin does. It gets glucose into the cell so that we can have energy and we aren't overweight. But when we have insulin resistance, we can't get glucose into the cell. So we're tired and we begin to store that glucose into our fat cell. And when I say we can't get glucose into the cell, I should clarify, we can't get glucose into our muscle cells and our liver cells where we can store it as energy, and we have to store that glucose in our fat cells. So we get fatter and we get more tired. And light is the most powerful force to counteract the effects of insulin resistance. What Dr. Cruz says is that insulin resistance is not only a food problem, it's also a light at night problem. What does that mean? Screens are making us fat. There is a lot of research on this. So many people are telling you, avoid blue screens, avoid blue light, avoid TV and, phones and computers after dark. Well, why? One of the reasons is that our body cannot tell the difference between blue light emanating from a TV and a computer and being outside at 12 p.m. The light, the broad spectrum wavelength, the blue light that is coming from your electronic devices at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, midnight, affects our pineal gland the same way that being outside in bright sunlight does, and not for the better, right? You can't use blue light at 12 a.m. as a stand-in for being outside for an hour a day. That's not really what we're talking about here. It just tricks your brain into thinking that you should be awake, essentially. And when you're awake, you are not allowing that leptin to dock to your hypothalamus. You're not allowing proper hunger and fullness cues to hit your brain. And you most certainly are not using insulin appropriately. Dr. Cruz says that the amino acid tyrosine is critical to insulin's release and also its storage. Tyrosine is an aromatic amino acid that absorbs UV light by nature's design. So we need plenty of tyrosine in order to use and utilize insulin appropriately. Now, tyrosine, again, is an amino acid. And what are you doing on the reset? Well, you're getting at least 100 grams of animal protein every single day. Amino acids are proteins. They come from animal protein. They'll come from plant protein too, but we are really focusing on animal protein here, and tyrosine is more abundant in animal protein than it is in plant protein. Notably, tyrosine is also necessary in order for you to make thyroid hormone, active thyroid hormone. The body needs plenty of this particular amino acid to convert T4 into T3. So you need to be getting your tyrosine. You also, when you're getting your tyrosine, getting your animal products every single day, you are going to become more insulin sensitive due to the action of this particular amino acid. Now on the reset, not only are you getting plenty of tyrosine, but you're also getting plenty of light. And I'm hoping that you're learning over the course of these 28 days why your circadian rhythm is so, so important, and why you should be pushing into getting as much sun throughout the day as you possibly can. Let's go into a little bit of the research. So one study found that each additional hour of bright sunlight exposure over a week was associated with a 1.05 decrease in insulin resistance. That might not seem like a lot, but this is 1 hour of bright sunlight exposure over a week. Each hour of bright sunlight exposure over a week was associated with another 1.05 decrease in insulin resistance. And you can see this here, this article, go to it if that's something that you want to, explore a little bit further. It's a really fascinating study. Other studies have also found that the bright sunlight exposure can lower insulin and, get this, also triglyceride levels and improve beta cell function. Beta cells are the cells in your pancreas that release insulin. So for a type 1 diabetic like my dear mama, beta cells are not working the way they do in someone who has a healthy pancreas like myself. And so just getting outside every single day for at least an hour a day can actually improve the functioning of your pancreas. This study also found that sunlight exposure was associated with lower LDL. How many of you guys are, concerned about, rising LDL levels in perimenopause, and lower triglycerides? And triglycerides are, associated with being overweight. That is the triglycerides themselves are sugars bound to fat. So, it's basically a sticky substance in the blood. Sugar and fat bound together make up triglycerides, and these are associated with aging. They're associated with metabolic disease and metabolic, insulin resistance. They're associated with gaining weight. So we really do want to have lower triglycerides. The lower, the better. We also want to have, normal levels of LDL. And there's some research and there's plenty of anecdotal evidence that lower LDL isn't necessarily better. We don't want super high LDL, of course, but you don't necessarily need to go on a statin. Talk with your doctor about that for sure. If you have LDL levels that are, right around 100 to 150, that's not out of range, especially for a perimenopausal woman. We need a little bit higher LDL. And in fact, in the literature, a little bit higher LDL is actually more cardioprotective than even HDL. So fascinating stuff on cholesterol, but suffice it to say, the picture of health, the picture of metabolic health is found in circadian rhythm. Proper circadian rhythm. There's 3 more studies I want to reference for you here with time-restricted eating, because we are working on reducing insulin resistance. So there are 3 studies I found here that have been shown that time-restricted eating, or TRE, which is also known as intermittent fasting, and this doesn't mean you eat 1 meal a day. It doesn't mean you're restricting all of your calories to just 6 hours a day. We're doing a moderate form of intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating on the reset. I want you to eat breakfast within 30 minutes of waking up. So it's going to be around 6:30 for most of you. I want you to finish eating by 6 p.m. every day. So you'll be eating for 12 hours and you'll be fasting for 12 hours. I want you eating only 3 meals for those 12 hours and not eating anything the 12 hours that you were supposed to be fasting. Why? Well, a network meta-analyses are the gold standard in peer-reviewed research, of 12 randomized controlled trials found that time-restricted eating can improve insulin resistance compared to non-time restricted eating approaches. So if you're on a quote diet, right? A diet or a nutritional plan that has you restrict the amount of hours that you're eating actually improves insulin resistance more compared to like a regular diet where you're eating 4, 5, 6 times a day. Another trial of time-restricted eating with caloric restriction in participants with obesity found decreased insulin resistance after 12 months of time-restricted eating. So this isn't something you just want to do for 28 days if you're struggling with your weight and your metabolism. This is something that you want to do pretty regularly going forward, especially if you're in perimenopause. Another study found that overweight patients with diabetes show that 10-hour time-restricted eating, so eating for just 10 hours a day, that would be basically 6:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., could improve insulin sensitivity and reduce the need for hypoglycemic drugs, so drugs that lower your blood sugar. This would be, things in our vernacular now like Ozempic and Wegovy and Mounjaro. Those are drugs that will lower your hemoglobin A1C. We really need to work on diet first, right? If you are overweight, if you do have diabetes or pre-diabetes, time-restricted eating can be your friend. The problem lies here. We're American women and we think if a little bit is good, more is better. Raise your hand if that's you. It's certainly me. What I'm not telling you to do is restrict all of your meals to 6 hours a day or 8 hours a day. All right. Use the literature and use my clinical experience to, be very comfortable with the fact that you could eat 12 hours a day as long as you're doing about, 3 meals a day and you're eating those within a 12-hour window. That is sufficient for a perimenopausal woman and her hormones. All right. Don't take this too crazy. So as I've said, multiple times, you're eating breakfast within 30 minutes of waking up and you're finishing your 3 meals, all 3 of them by 6 p.m. at the latest, earlier if you can. And if you're not losing weight on the reset, or if you're not losing weight at a reasonable clip, also, you're not going to lose 5 pounds a week on the reset. Okay. That is not what this plan is designed to do. We want slow, actionable repeatable, reasonable weight loss. You should be expecting yourself to lose between 1 and 2 pounds a week on the reset. That's very normal. The first week, if you've been eating a standard American diet, you might lose 4 or 5 pounds. That's a lot of inflammation. And the rest of the weeks, you should be losing between, 1 to 2 pounds. If that's not happening, most likely you're fairly insulin resistant. And so you might want to move up your meals by an hour or 2. So maybe you don't do a 12-hour window. Maybe you do a 10-hour window. But here is the caveat. You do not wait to have breakfast until 8:30 a.m. and then finish your meals by 6. You still eat your breakfast by 6:30 a.m. You just move up that last meal to 4:30. All right. We really want to take advantage of the hours of the day where your metabolic fire is raging. We want to give your hypothalamus that safety signal that breakfast is here, therefore food is plentiful throughout the day, and we want to take advantage of circadian rhythm and light. So don't eat later, finish the meals a little bit earlier if you are not losing, 1 to 2 pounds a week. So please be gracious with yourself, be reasonable, know that this is a sustainable long-term plan, and you don't have to go too crazy, all right? You might just have to manipulate a few variables over the course of the 28 days. Well done, my friend, and I will see you up next for Module 26, which are minerals.